story is going to move really fast now, although Esther may not have thought that it was moving too fast. She's just come out of a 3-day time of fasting. And I think that that probably felt like a very long time in so many ways, because when you are doing without and you have just a burden on you, then it just seems like sometimes time can stand still. So I really think that that time of fasting for Esther seemed long. But you know, we learned last week that even though she was going into a fast, she had already surrendered. If you recall, she told Mordecai. Mordecai told her, "You've got to go to the king and you've got to beg for the salvation of his people. You've got to beg for that." And she had her excuses. But then we see that she says, "Okay, Mordecai, you go and fast. You tell all the other Jews in the city to fast. Me and my attendants, we're going to fast. And at the end of those 3 days," do you remember what she said? She said, "I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish." So the time of fasting for Esther was not her time of surrender. Her fasting was a time of preparing for her future, because she had already surrendered when she said those words. I think that's a wonderful example for us to go by, is that we can go ahead and surrender and know that then we can go into a very devoted time with God to see what his plan is for us once we're in surrender mode. It says on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, and I don't know as a queen how many sets of royal robes that she had. She might have had her blue set, she might have had her purple set, she might have had her casual set of royal robes, she might have had her most elegant, most formal. I don't know which set she was wearing, but this is what I think I know. I think I know she wore the one that she thought was going to please the king the most. Whichever one that was, I think that's the one that she probably wore. When she first approached the king, the very first time, if you remember, she had Haggai tell her what to wear. And she said, "You just tell me." She didn't know the king. I mean, she knew of him. She didn't personally know him, but she knew that Haggai did, so that Haggai could best tell her how to approach the king. She took his advice. But here, she doesn't have to talk to Haggai. She's been wed to the king. She knows him personally. She's grown together with the king, and she knows what to wear, and that is what she puts on. Can you imagine her attendants? I mean, she's had them fasting with her for 3 days. They know something is up. They have probably known that she is going to approach the king. They may know that she's not on the schedule to approach the king. We have to assume some of these things. But I think with their time of fasting with her, they knew enough to know that her life may have been in peril that day, that this was a big decision that was going to be made. So I imagine as they dressed her, helped her get dressed that morning, that they were very mindful of how serious a time it was. I wonder if they thought, "I may never dress my queen again." It could be. Or the woman attendant that brought in maybe her favorite juice or fruit or whatever that morning. You know, did she come in and say, "This may be the last meal that I served my queen"? If the queen had been fasting for 3 days, the people around her knew this was a very serious time. Maybe as she is getting dressed and she's walking down the hall and she has to go from her quarters in the palace, which were probably way over here, and she has to walk to the other side, and she has to approach the throne room where King Xerxes, it tells us, is seated. There's people that she's going to pass along the way. So maybe she passes the chef, and the chef sees her and she's in her royal attire, and he's like, "Oh, that feast, I need to go make sure that we got something other ready for the feast," because she has informed us that she's going to have a feast. She hasn't told the king yet, but they know it. Oh, I've got to take care of that. Maybe something like that was on their mind. Or maybe there was the advisors and they had their schedule for the day. And as she's going, they're like, Queen, she's all in her royal attire. And where is she going today? I don't see her on the list. Why is she dressed in her royal attire? And she just keeps on walking and walking, getting closer to the throne room. And the closer that she gets, it becomes more obvious where she is heading. And the closer she gets, the people that she's passing by are now closer to the king. And they know that she is not on the schedule to see the king. So I imagine the tension is getting very, very high. So she has to go and walk all the way, and she has to turn. And if you visualize the palace with everything just big, remember our first lesson about in the big wide doorways, and she's probably getting ready to step in front of that big wide doorway and face the king. I think there might have been an advisor over here that wants to say, "You're not on the list. No. Maybe there's one that he bows down and I beg you, don't do that." There might be some of that going on. And Esther, she still just keeps walking. There's probably people in the throne room with the king. There's business going on. And when she gets there and she turns and they notice her, don't you know that they probably looked at the king like, the king turned and looked at Esther and bowed to Esther and then put their eyes over at the king. I think it was one of those very be still moments. You know, we talked about that last week about being still. And being still is not in the Bible talking about just don't do anything. Being still is absorbing the moment. So I think when she got there in the doorway and she was facing the king, that it was a be still moment. Absorb what is going on. I think there was a hush that went over the whole area. And I think everybody just sucked the air right out of them to see what would go on. Well, we know what happened if you read your chapter. Because the king, he takes his golden scepter and he holds it out. And when King Xerxes holds out that scepter, he is extending life to Esther. And I think all that air that was sucked in, we went, because the king has accepted her. And in her respectful way, she walks up and she touches the tip of the scepter and she's saying, I accept the life that you give me. I accept your mercy. So we would want to say or think that King Xerxes was in control in the moment. I mean, he's the one that had the power, supposedly, to extend life to her. But I want to say to you that King Xerxes might have been the one sitting on the throne, but it was God in control. It was God's providence, we've talked about that, that was God's providence there that put her in position and the king in the mood to do that. In Proverbs 21:1, it says, the king's heart is like a stream of water directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever he pleases. So the king may have thought he was in control himself, but it was actually God. So Esther, she approaches and she touches the scepter. At that moment, the king knows that because Esther has come in unannounced, that this is an important moment for Esther. Because he knows that Esther knows that he could have had her killed. So he knows that there is something huge going on for Esther to be there. And he says to her, what is it, Queen Esther? He says, what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you. So what he is saying to Esther, what is it that you want? Giving you half the kingdom, he's saying, you know what? We're going to step in and we're going to deal with this together. I'm going to come by your side, and we're going to take care of this. Up to half of the kingdom can be yours, whatever it is. Well, Esther didn't say, well, I'd kind of like to have a new robe. I've had this one for 30 days now, or, something like that. Or she could have said, I need more attendance. But we know it wasn't a frivolous time. But I want you to notice that she didn't beg for the rescue of the Jewish people either. Now, I don't know about some of you, but I may have like the king, and I'm all nervous, and I'm shook up and everything, and the king says, what do you know? I just say my people, just say my people. And just kind of blubber it all out. But she doesn't. She doesn't tell him why she's there. What Esther is doing is she is exercising discretion. She knows what the king needs. And if we've been studying the king at all, we kind of know what he needs too. He needs feast. Because that's what King Xerxes likes. And Esther, she's a true woman. She knows that the way to a man's heart is through smoke. But that's what she does. She says, King, would you and Haman come to a feast that I have prepared for you today? That's her request. And so he says, we'll go. Bring Haman at once, and we will go to Esther's feast. Now, I find it really interesting about Haman. We talked a lot about him last week, but I find it really interesting about Haman that the king had given Haman his ring so that whatever he sealed became law, right? So he was second only to the king, is what we say, but I think he was second to the king and the queen. Because you see, when Haman is summoned, he doesn't refuse. He might have the king's ring, but he has no authority over the queen either. And so he goes to the feast. It says that they go to the feast and they eat, and back in that day, this was a long drawn out ordeal. That says that they ate and then they drank. And so they were in the drinking side of the feast. This king doesn't do anything small, so therefore when she prepared a feast, it wasn't pimento cheese and crackers or, something like that. This was a full-blown feast where he would have gotten his stomach full, and now he was filling up with wine. It was a big feast. And when he was feeling good, he said to her again, he said, Esther, now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom. It will be granted. So he is reassuring her that, Esther, whatever you want, I'm going to come along beside you and help. I'm going to give you what you need. But Esther's not ready yet. So she has approached the king and taken her life in her hands, right? And hasn't told him. She's thrown this big feast, and she still doesn't tell him. So what is it that's going on that makes Esther not tell him yet? We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. Maybe she has a tug inside of her, or a sudden restraint that says, I don't need to do that. Not today. I don't need to tell him. Maybe there's something that went on in the conversation that caused her to be fearful, and she just didn't work it out. Maybe during her time of fasting, she knew that this might go a little longer than what she really wanted it to go, but that she was going to do it on God's timing, and she may have realized this is not God's timing. But she says to the king, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, let the king and Haman come again tomorrow to a banquet, and then I will answer the king's questions. So, the king and Haman and Esther, they all leave. They're done for the day. And the king, I imagine he goes with his belly full and in full spirits, and he goes back to his quarters. Esther, she may go back to her room. I don't know. If I were her, I would have just collapsed, you know. Or I might have, like, been nervous about what was going to happen the next day. I'm not sure. But what it tells us is what Haman did. Because what Haman did, it says he was happy and in high spirits. He's just really proud of himself. Not only did he get one invitation to go to a feast with the king and Esther only in attendance, but now he's gotten two. So he is going to go home and he's going to brag to his wife and his friends. He's going to tell them how big a person he is, how special he is, and how excited, what a good day it was, what a nice impression he made, and all of those things. And that's what he's going to tell them. But on the way, he runs into Mordecai. And what was Mordecai supposed to do? Mordecai's supposed to bow. Mordecai didn't bow. And at this point, what does Mordecai have to lose? I mean, Mordecai has already taken his stand. He stood firm. And he was not going to bow to King Xerxes. Now he's had a proclamation put on his life that he's going to die almost a year from now. So his life has already been marked for death. And he's not going to bow. But Haman doesn't see it that way. Haman wants him to bow. Even though he has pronounced death to this man, he wants him to bow. And he is just enraged, it says, because Mordecai refuses to do that. We can be in a very callous world today. Is anybody in agreement that we are in a callous world? Well, I think it was a very callous world back then, because you know what happens is he tells his wife, he says, Mordecai ruined my day. It's basically what he's saying. I was having just this grand time. I'm invited back tomorrow, and I had to see that Mordecai, he's a thorn in my side. He refuses to bow. And what am I supposed to do with that man? And he's just angry. Well, his wife, I think she's a little callous, because this is what she says. She says, well, just set up a pole. Make that pole 75 feet tall. And then just tell the king to impale Mordecai. And then you go to that banquet, and you have a good time. So I think that sounds a little callous, doesn't it? Just go ahead and have a field now, but you go and have a good time. You have a good time. So it says that this suggestion delighted Haman. So he had the pole set up. And that is where this chapter ends, this scene in our story on the book of Esther. So what we need to pull from this is what is Esther's strategy? Exactly what is her strategy? Well, she pays attention to what she wears, right? She takes into account what pleases the king, food, good wine. She knows that's always a pleaser with the king. She also knows not to blurt out anything. And I think that's kind of telling on what she does with her strategy. She's no different than you and I. Sometimes our only strategy is to pull from our experience, where we have been and what we know. So she knew what the king liked. He liked a beautiful woman. She knew that if she put on her royal robes, he would see her as his queen. He would see her with her authority position that he had given her. So she pulls from that history, knowing that. She takes into account what pleases him, feasts and parties, and the way to get to him and get him settled and find his favor was through that. She also remembers Queen Vashti, when Queen Vashti blurted out the word no. And what happened to Queen Vashti? So she takes that into account. So that is really the only strategy she has right now, is just to pull from her past. That's what we have to do. We don't have the future to deal with. We have our past. So when we are like Esther and we are called for such a time as now, and we are ready and we know that God is wanting to use us, then we just have to know that our first strategy is to pull from what we already know. I think Esther must have known some words from the prophets because of her upbringing. I think as she went to bed that night, these are some words, I'm just guessing, but I'm hoping, I'm thinking that things like this came to her mind. I'm thinking that maybe words like from the prophet Isaiah might have come to her mind. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. She had taken the time to fast, and I think because she took that time to fast, her mind was stayed on who was going to see her through this mission that she had to accomplish. And because she fasted, she had developed that time to trust God. So I think she might have remembered something like that. I think she might have remembered in Isaiah again from the prophet, fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. I'm hoping, I'm thinking that she probably remembered those words of comfort where God was saying, don't be afraid. I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to be with you. I think those were words of comfort that may have come to Esther. But I only think that those things could come to Esther because she had not only a history of her day-to-day, but she had a history with God. We said in the book of Esther, God is not mentioned one time, but we know that by her upbringing and by the fact that she is going to fast, that she knows who God is and she knows His Word. And so she has called herself to put herself in a position to remember what God has said. I think it really pays to know what God says. It's important to do your Bible studies. It's important to know what He says because what He says is going to help you. I think it's important to build a relationship with God, whether that be in Bible study or in fasting or meditation or any of those things. Because it's when we build a relationship with someone, that is where we build that trust. That's where we build that insight, that intuition. The more you know someone, the more inclined you are to understand what they are thinking. And so I think that with her, she, by knowing the words of God, she was building on that trust that she had with Him. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to take time to build a relationship. So as we find ourselves in positions to do what God wants us to do, then we have that at our disposal. Here's the deal. You know, if you remember, Mordecai told Esther, he said, now look, you know, I want you to go beg for the lives of the Jewish people. But Esther, you've got to know, whether you do it or not, God will save His people, remember? He will save His people. But perhaps this was a time that you were chosen for to be part of it. Perhaps you taking place in it will benefit you because what did He tell her? Don't think for a moment that if you do not help, that your life won't be touched. That's what Mordecai told Esther, and that's our deal. God has a plan for each of us, and there's going to be a time in our life where God is going to call us, and it's going to be like that, I'm supposed to be doing something moment. And we can choose to be silent, not do anything. We can decide we're just not going to help or encourage others. We can decide that. Doesn't matter if we decide that or not. God's plan is going to prevail. But we are just like Esther. Don't think for a moment that your life will not be touched in some way. Your life will be touched if you help and you follow along with God's plan. Your life will be touched if you don't. Do y'all remember what He told Esther would happen to her? He said, you and your family will die, is what He told her. So that's the deal. Remember last week we talked about the stronghold, and the word is actually a palace. You work on your strongholds. Are you ladies ready to get out of your stronghold? Are you ready to leave the comforts of your palace? Are you ready to give it up and be a part of what God has called you to do? Are you ready to move forward? Leave that past behind. Pull from your past those things that you know and have experienced and that you can use so that you can be a part of God's plan. I got 3 women that I want to share with you real quick, and you'll know probably at least 2 of these. Mother Teresa. Everybody's heard of Mother Teresa. A Catholic nun that she went to India. She helped the sick and the poor and the orphans with AIDS and TB and all other kinds of disabilities. That was her life mission. And if you look at her character traits and her values, you can see compassion, you can see perseverance, you can see faith in what she did. And when she went, what was she going with? She went with what she knew, what had been instilled in her. That's what she carried with her. I don't know if you've ever heard of Katie Davis Majors. Katie Davis Majors, when it was time for her to get out of high school and to go to college, she told her parents, I'm going to take a year off and do some mission work. And her parents was like, really? But she was a strong Christian, and she decided that's what she was going to do. So she went to Africa, and she founded a ministry in 2008 called the Amazima Ministries. Amazima meant truth. She founded that in 2008. She went straight out of high school, and by the time she was 23 years old, she had adopted 13 girls.
Oh, wow.
She was mother to 13 girls who were in need. She said that her desire, see if you can hear what her character traits and her values were here. Her desire was to see lives transformed, relationships restored, and communities changed through the truth of Jesus Christ. A young girl, and what did she have going for her? Very few years of experience. She had that boldness that only teenagers sometimes have, just to go into the vast unknown and not worry, right? But that's what she had to go. I think y'all will know, most of you will know this woman, Colleen Angel, lives in our community. All right, I think of her often because what does she do? She takes wedding dresses, and then she has them, she cuts them into little pieces and parts and she makes little bitty premature burial clothes for babies who never get to leave the hospital. It's a powerful ministry. She has sent thousands upon thousands of these out because there's such a big need. You can see her character traits and you can see her values, but I want you to start thinking about Colleen this week and these women, what their skills and their talents are, because that's what you're going to be doing in your study, your skills and your talents. So I don't know all of Colleen's background, but I know what she has a skill called sewing. It's not one of mine, but she has that skill, and that's what she takes and she uses it for God's glory. She's taking just what she has, her experiences, and she's using it for the day. So I have just 3 quick points for you, and that is, how are you going to live out your purpose today? Even when you don't know what God's plan is. Maybe you haven't had that be still moment. Maybe you're not living in that moment where I know God has this big plan for me right now. Maybe you're just in your everyday moment, or you're trying to figure out which direction to go. God has a plan for you, and here are some steps that you can take. First, understand that God is positioning people in your life. He is positioning people in your life. And some of these people you like. They're going to be your friend. They're going to be pleasant to deal with. Some of them are going to be the enemy sitting across the table. Just like Esther was sitting across the table. God's going to position people like that in your life. So you've got to know that. And why does God have a plan? Just keep going back to that same thing, because God wants a family. So God is positioning people in your life, and I want you to hear these verses. Colossians 4:2 says, be persistent and devoted to prayer. being alert and focused in your prayer life with an attitude of thanksgiving. That's pretty specific. It's be persistent and devoted to what? Prayer. Being alert and focused in what? Your prayer life. How is your prayer life supposed to be? An attitude of thanksgiving. That's in Colossians 4:2. So as you are in that mode of today, what am I preparing for? Know that one thing that you need to have is the right attitude of prayer. Being a prayerful spirit in the right attitude. God, help me see who you're placing in my life today. Help me know what I'm supposed to do. Lord, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you for putting those people in my life. So the right attitude of prayer. Colossians 4:3-4 says, at the same time, pray for us, this is him speaking, that God will open a door to us for the word, to proclaim the mystery of Christ, for whom I have been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way that I should. So as you are waiting for God's plan to play out, you're positioning yourself with the right attitude of prayer, then position yourself to be ready when the opportunity presents itself. Be ready when the opportunity presents itself. So how do you do that? You learn to relate. God is putting these people in your life. Learn to relate. What do they like? What do they not like? What values do you share? What skills or talents do you have that are alike? Know the people. Build relationships with the people around you so you can learn to relate, so that when God says, that's the person that I want you to speak out with, you'll be ready. So be ready when opportunity. And how do you speak out? Y'all have been working on that already. Your stories. Perfect way. You see someone, you're building a relationship with them, something happens in their life, and you know that God is saying, I have put them, positioned them in your life for this moment. And you've been building a relationship with them for this moment. And you're like, what can I do? You can share that portion of your story that relates to them. And the last point that I have for you, it comes out of Colossians 4:5-6. Conduct yourself with wisdom in your interactions with outsiders, that's non-believers. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your speech at all times be gracious and pleasant, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how to answer each one who questions you. So what did we do? We make sure that we're kind. We use wisdom. It says, let your speech, it's worth repeating, let your speech at all times be gracious and pleasant, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how to answer each one. So as you're positioning yourself, as you're praying about it, when you know that God is telling you to speak up and you share your story, what are you sharing with them? You are sharing the solution that Jesus Christ has the answer for them, just like he had for you. So if you want to be a part of God's plan, then know this is where you start today. Today you just start with what your past brings you, where God puts people in your life. And just be kind, be ready, be prayerful, and God's going to show up and do the rest.